Welcome back, everyone, to Feeling Through Live. It's been a little while, and we're excited to be back, and particularly excited for this special episode with the Paralympics coming up. We've got a pretty amazing guest who's, I'd say, pretty qualified to speak on these matters. The amazing Candace Cable, who you will give a much better intro for yourself, but I'd like to brag about you a little bit first before you get a chance to talk about yourself. So Candace is a 9-time Winter and Summer Paralympian, a 12-time medalist in 3 sports. I'm seeing here that you've won 84 marathons. I don't even know how you've competed in anywhere near that, but that sounds pretty amazing to me, which includes 6 Boston marathons. And you also happen to be a U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Hall of Famer, which is pretty amazing. So we're definitely going to talk plenty about that, but we'll also have an opportunity to talk about a lot of the work that you're doing today around the diversity, equity, inclusion, and access consulting that you do, and a number of other things that relate to that. But Candace, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody. Candace Cable here. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm going to give a quick audio description of myself. I am a Caucasian woman, and I'm wearing black dark rimmed glasses, and my hair is a kind of blonde silver color about the length of my chin, and I'm wearing a green shirt with a necklace made of beads around my neck that my sister made for me, which I love so much. And then over my right shoulder, I have 2 books. One is Disability Visibility, which is a really great book for people who want to get some ideas around disability. And the other one is from an organization called Sins Invalid, which is the lead organization around disability justice. And that one's Skin, Tooth, and Bones. And you can go on their website and get it. It's a disability justice primer. And it's really important when we want to talk about rights and justice and liberation for disabled folks.
Thank you for that intro. And to give a visual description, I am a white male in my 30s with short dark hair, short dark beard, a light bluish button-up shirt, and a pretty empty, kind of sea greenish wall behind me over my right shoulder, just the edge of my shelf with a couple trinkets on there. And one other thing to mention before we hop into this, Candace and I met actually at the very last in-person Feeling Through experience we were able to do before the pandemic in Los Angeles, which I will say, eager to bring that back into a theater, but a pretty great way to go out for the time being. That was a really amazing event. But I'd love to start really just with can you talk about how you got involved at the Paralympics and really just kind of where your athletic origins begin?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I grew up as a non-disabled kid in Southern California, and I lived a life of not feeling like I had any kind of boundaries or, of course I had parents that we had some rules, but that I could do anything, that I could be anything, which is kind of the point of what I'm trying to make, is that I never felt like I was limited in what I could be or do. And I love being outdoors. I was not an athlete. I did not enjoy competitive sports. And I was a great, supporter of sports. I loved watching sports. I watched the Olympics all the time with my dad when they were on. And and about 1975, at the age of 21, I was in a car accident that resulted in a spinal cord injury that paralyzed my legs and required me to use a wheelchair for mobility. And I had never seen anyone who had used a wheelchair before. And I was 6 months in the hospital. Once I'd gotten out, I felt so alone and isolated and angry and bitter. And so many things because I didn't have a lot of coping skills that I had developed, at the age of 21, which I don't think a lot of 21-year-olds have very many. And probably the ones I had were not good. So I became really isolated and depressed, and it took about a year and a half for me to realize that I needed help. And I remember so well, because I had gotten into using drugs to try to dull the psychological pain as well as the emotional and physical pain. And I said to my mom, I need help. And she was like, oh, thank you, finally. Because you can't force anything on anyone. And so we have to come to those realizations ourselves. And my mother knew right where to send me. She had worked for a free clinic for a very long time. And I got into a live-in program that I met with a psychologist and was in group therapy. 7 days a week, we were doing something to develop coping skills and also to break down and dismantle some of those ideas that we had of what we thought we could be, and how we can redefine who we want to be. And that's kind of how I got my path into sports. Was I started to go to university at Long Beach State here in Southern California, and they had disabled student services. I went there because I was looking for community. And that really was my start, was wanting to create community, because I felt so alone, as I've said multiple times. And once I got there, I was, wow, it's like the bar scene in Star Wars. I mean, there were so many different kinds of disabilities. And I'd only really seen people with spinal cord injuries previously, that I was just, my eyes were opened and I was excited and I wanted to spend time with so many. And I gravitated toward the people who were moving around the world like me, because I also wanted to figure out how they dealt with it. Like, what are you doing to cope with this? Because nothing is accessible. I mean, for me to be able to get on the other side of the street, I would have to find a driveway, go down into the street, cross the street, and then look for another driveway to be able to get back onto the sidewalk. And that is so dangerous. We didn't have curb cuts, and things were just starting to pop a little bit in the independent living movement. And so the sport people were developing some sports, and I was hanging out with them, and I tried a few different ones, and wheelchair racing was just being invented. So I thought, oh, this seems like fun, and I'm with them. And to be a competitor still wasn't anything that was at the top of my list. But what I did feel was this sense of inclusion that I hadn't had before. And it came in the form of participating in a road race, that a bunch of other people who were using wheelchairs were going to do a 5K or a 10K. I think it might have been a 10K, and it was at Griffith Park, and we had the same start line, the same course, and the same finish line as the runners. And so it just really felt like home again. And that started me on this path of getting involved in Paralympic sport. My first Paralympic Games was 1980. And in those games, at that time, the Paralympics were starting to follow the Olympics. And so we were in some of the same venues, in the same city, some of those kind of things, but there wasn't a contract like there is today. There's a contract today that says if you bid for an Olympic or a Paralympic Games, you must put on both games. So that didn't exist then. And that year in 1980, the games were in Moscow, and the Soviets said they didn't have any disabled people. So they weren't going to hold the Paralympic Games, which kind of shows you that as people with disabilities, we weren't out until the mid 20th century. Before that, we were either eradicated or institutionalized. So that opened up my eyes into some of the things that I do in the advocacy world.
So thank you for that wonderful intro.
It's
So
kind of long. Sorry.
no, it was great though. You know, I want to walk back just a little bit because you really beautifully described how initially it sounds like your introduction to sports was really about community and finding community. At what point did it start to shift from like, oh, this is something where I'm finding community to like, oh, like I'm good at this or I want to compete in this? Like when did that start to happen?
Thanks. Yes. So there was a shift, but I never left the idea of community. I was always seeking ways to create community or join communities, and so that has always been a part of my path and has continued to this day. I suppose it probably shifted when I had a sense of accomplishment and a little bit of success. It was probably when I felt it the strongest because I was really just following the pack. Oh, that's what they're doing. I'll go over here. I'll do that too. And, and so I was also swimming because I had started to swim to get stronger. And a really wonderful person and swim coach who's very successful swim coach in the non-disabled world, John Urbanchek, was coaching at Long Beach State. And I wheeled in thinking I was going to a swim class. And it was actually a swim training, it was a team. And I wanted to participate. He said, yeah, I'll help you jump in the pool. We'll work on your strokes and you can compete when the other athletes are competing, but we'll give you a shorter distance. And again, he was another person that made me feel really included. First, my community, that 5-10K that I participated in, and then John Urbanchak. And I started to swim. And so I went to a competition with my friends that were wheelchair racing. And I was swimming, and someone said, oh, you should try the racing chairs. And I was, oh, there's racing chairs? Because I was using my regular chair, which was this 50-pound stainless steel Everest and Jennings chair. And I jumped in this racing chair, and she said, now go around the track as fast as you can, and I'll time you. And I did, and she said, you're really close to the national record. And I went, ooh, that sounds like a really good thing. And she said, yes, it is. So she became my coach, Barbara Chambers, and set the foundation for me to get involved in wheelchair racing as a competitor. Before that, it was just a kind of little recreation thing, and I thought I was going to be this really competitive swimmer, and the swimming didn't work out, but the wheelchair racing did.
I'm so curious by this as someone who like self-described grew up not as an athlete, like an athlete appreciator, but not as an athlete. And all it sounds like quite quickly you're finding yourself not just good, but doing certain things at a very, very high level. Did that surprise you? Were you like, what did you think at this moment when you're realizing you have times that are like competitive with some of the best people out there?
Well, I was very surprised. And if I thought back on sports when I was growing up in middle school and high school, where you're really participating in PE, I really didn't enjoy the idea of confrontation. And competition felt like confrontation. And so when this came around to me, and I did feel a sense of accomplishment, which I never felt then because I was trying to avoid it. Which I think that's what happens when you're trying to avoid something, you don't get the full extent and feeling of it. I then thought, okay, well, I'm not going to compete against people. I'm going to compete against myself. And that helped me deal with and then begin to dismantle the issues I had around confrontation. Because I also had issues in confrontation of not wanting to argue with people. I had trouble, kind of speaking up for myself, those kind of things. Peer pressure was something that really got a hold of me. It was really one of the reasons why I was in that accident, was that I was pressured to get into a vehicle with someone who had been drinking against my own feeling of intuitively not doing it, but I didn't want to argue with anyone. So I did get in, and then everything changed. So for me, I shifted the perspective of competing against people and, battling them, to more competing against myself and battling my own demons. And I think that was my saving grace in the beginning. But then I began to dismantle my weird relationship with confrontation.
So it sounds like it was like a 3 or 4 year period between like beginning to your sports life and being at your first Paralympic Games. Is that about correct timeline wise?
Actually, no, because my injury was in 1975, and my first Paralympic Games was 1980. And around 1978, late 77, was when I started to get a little more involved with all these different things. And that, being a part of that Paralympic Games came really quickly, because I was swimming and I thought I would be competing in swimming, and I'd gone to a couple regional things. But I was told that if I wanted to be on the team when I competed at the trials in swimming and track, that I would have to only do the track. So I would have to choose. So I wanted to go because I'd not traveled hardly at all, and here was this opportunity. We weren't going to Moscow. We were going to Arnhem, Holland, because they decided that the Dutch said, "We'll hold the games. We've got disabled people. We like them." So we were there living in army barracks, and and there were multiple sports going on there at the time in 1980.
So in just a couple of years, again, you described growing up and really loving watching the Olympics. Now you're a Paralympian just within a couple of years of starting to compete. What do you feel like going into that first games? And do you have like a sense of like what your chances are, or are you just kind of like enamored to be there? What were you feeling like when you're touching ground for your first Paralympian Games?
Oh, so you said it perfectly. I was enamored to be there. I was just so excited to be at this, and I was I was your proverbial rookie. I had no idea what I was doing. Well, I had some idea of the wheelchair racing because I'd had this fantastic coach, Barbara Chambers, that really worked me hard and gave me lots of ideas on how to do the races that I would be in, because at that time too, women and certain disabilities, because I'll talk about that in a second, classification, certain disabilities could only do certain distances. So my longest distance that my class was allowed to do was 800 meters. So I did I'm trying to think. I think I had 4 events. I have to go back and look. But I had an 800 meters, I believe, and a 400 meters. And we didn't have 100 meters. We had 60 meters. So I had those 3 events and that I was competing in. And then time in between where I could go and watch all the other events. And then, of course, everybody wanted to go sightsee, because we're in Holland, and we're in Europe, for goodness sakes. So I got to know my competitors there. I'd never competed against any of them before because I hadn't been out of the United States. And so I really was just enamored to be there, and so excited to meet new people and other women that were doing sports, because there were so few women that we had doing sports. It was mostly men, because I believe the statistics are, and they may have changed a little bit, but about 80% of the folks that have an acquired disability are usually men, and the rest are women. And then women, and again, it's changed a lot because we're really embracing women doing sport and having athletic bodies. Then we didn't even have Title IX yet. So then it was more, a woman usually got a disability, and say it was one that had to do with mobility, they usually tried to come up with something that was going to either have them married and have children, or have a job somewhere. And sports was not in the, in the top tier of things that they were going to pursue. I happily fell into it because I was a single person, but also I was looking to hang out with people. And I didn't have this idea around body image so much before my disability, but I did start to feel it after. And I think it was also because using the wheelchair, there's a whole lot of perceptions that are put on top of me that are myths and don't reflect what the true experience is like. So I mean, some of the most ridiculous questions people would say, and also quite hurtful, or, if I were you, I would kill myself kind of thing, because they can't imagine how they would live their life with a disability, because, as I said before, we weren't visible. So you never saw us, and we were always considered, disability was considered a very bad thing. And so you saw people with non-visible or non-apparent disabilities, but you wouldn't know, right, unless you interacted with them. So yeah, I was just enamored to be there.
And did you medal in your first games that you participated in?
I did. I have a picture of me too, in my very first medal, sitting in my giant wheelchair and on top of the podium, and with my two compadres next to me, and it was, yeah, you could see I'm super happy.
I mean, I just think again, like I know I keep going back to this, but I'm just so enamored with going from, like, in a span of 2 years, going from someone who really didn't identify as, like, athletic to, like, being on the podium at the Paralympic Games with a medal. It just feels like such an insane an amazing 2 year transformation as far as who you maybe have thought you were to a kind of new part of yourself that you realized along the way in those 2 years. It's just really incredible.
Well, thank you. And it is pretty incredible. And we also have to think about the time that it was, is that there wasn't much for all of us to participate in, and there wasn't a lot of opportunity. We were left out of the Civil Rights Act in the 60s, and the Rehabilitation Act was signed in 1973. Yeah, 1973, but the regulations weren't written until a bunch of disabled people took over the federal building in San Francisco, which to this day is the longest takeover of a federal building ever. And they finally got the regs signed in 1977. And in case there are people that are watching this want to watch something fun about that, go Google on YouTube Drunk History 504, and you'll get to see a great show. And I'm responsible for that happening because I pitched that and helped them build that whole episode, because I, as I was talking about my sister earlier with this necklace, have an Emmy award-winning costume supervisor sister who worked on that show, and I'm a major fangirl of her. So I love getting on sets that she's on, and I kept talking to the creators of the show. I was like, you need to do disability history. You need to do disability history. No one knows anything about us, and it was that whiny voice too I used. And and they put it off and they put it off, but finally they succumbed, and it got such great reviews by the disabled community. I'm so proud of what the folks at Drunk History did. They did it exactly right. They put the episode right in between two civil rights episodes, and it really showed, the importance of rights. And so really, disabled people in the United States didn't get their civil rights until 1990, when we had the Americans with Disabilities Act signed. And even if we want to talk about human rights, we were left out of all human rights documents until 2008. when the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities was finally signed and had begun to be ratified by countries of the world, because very few countries in the world, even by 2008, had rights laws for people with disabilities. So yeah, it was such a time when we had nothing. We came together as family, community, but as family, and we kept trying to support each other to be successful in whatever ways we needed. And so I think that really contributed to my acceleration of success. And my coach always said, "You're kind of a natural at this. You have a really pretty stroke." So yeah, but if you watch wheelchair racing in Tokyo, you'll see how their arms come up really high like a bird and then down, and so that was something I was able to do quite well.
So you really encapsulated, that there's been so much change in the world on a number of fronts since your first Paralympian Games. As a 9-time Paralympian and someone who is also a Hall of Famer and I'm sure has some relationship with the Games to this day, what kind of evolution in the Games themselves have you seen, over the time that you first competed in them to now?
Yeah, wow, it's like, oh my gosh, what could I compare it to? It's like the Model T to the Lamborghini. It definitely, we've had such massive growth, and we've had some paradigm shift moments that I think contributed greatly to the advancement of Paralympic sport and the advancement for people with disabilities. So when I was racing, we were inventing the equipment. We were really inventing the racing wheelchair. So it went from a regular chair, which you don't see those chairs anymore because those 50-pounders are pretty much out the door now. 4 wheels, no brakes, no steering, no helmets. The gloves that you see them wear when they're wheelchair racing now are real. They're molded and created for their hands. We had batting gloves that we took and wrapped tape and foam around them like crazy to protect our hands. And so we helped evolve all of that, as well as the little mini 3-wheel dragsters that you see now are a part of what we all did during our evolution. Because when I stopped racing wheelchairs, we had gotten to the kneeling position and the 3 wheels and brakes and a little bit of it's called the compensator, and it's something that's attached to the front wheel so that the front wheel can be held very stiffly. And we created it to compensate for the crown of the road. So when we were in road races, marathons, 10Ks, all those things, if we weren't right on the very center in the crown, then our chairs were being pulled either left or right by the way the road dips down into the gutter to get the water to run off. And very creative, right? And so we needed something, because we weren't always able to run the crown. We needed something that was going to force our front wheel out of the gutter and go straight. So we created these different things with springs that eventually came into this little tube that has a very stiff spring in it attached to the front wheel. And then there's a bar or a little triangle that the athlete can just tap a little bit to adjust the front wheel to turn this way or that way a little bit, to the left or the right. And then we started to realize that it would work really well on the track when we hit the corners, because the faster you go on a track, the more centrifugal force wants to throw you out. And so athletes were having to really push hard on their outside arm to stay in, because that centrifugal force wanted to throw you out. So we figured out how to create that compensator in a way so that it worked for the road and the track. And so if you look really closely, when you watch the athletes on the tracks, you'll see when they come out of a turn, their hand will tap something really quickly. And then when they, just before they go into a turn, their hand will tap something on the opposite side really quickly. And that is the bar that's attached to the compensator that they've set their front wheel for that turn, and the speed that they're going to be doing in that turn. So we created all those things. And when I was a part of all of that creation, we were also creating the guidelines and rules for race directors to incorporate a wheelchair division into running races. We traveled all over the United States, just going to so many road races, sometimes marathons on Saturday and Sunday, to be able to build this division. And when we started to do that, as we were working on our equipment and things, I started to get that sense of, this is advocacy. This is what advocacy is creating opportunity by showing people how it works and coming up with regulations and rules of how it works, and then how we get integrated all together, right? Because we don't want to be separate. We want to do these things together. And that's, the word inclusion that we're all talking about all the time now, and we hear so much. We want to do these things together. And that started my brain going in the direction of, oh, well, I can do advocacy like this, and I can do advocacy around dismantling the stigmas and the stereotypes and the myths that surround disability as a bad thing, and show it's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just a life thing we're all going to have. It's a life experience we will all have. And if you all live long enough, if nothing else, aging will get you into the club. So creating a world that works for all of us, it's so critical and important and necessary, because we don't want to leave anyone behind when we create a world where everybody has the opportunity to choose what opportunities they want to participate in, right? So for me, it's choice. It's being able to have the choice of whether or not I want to participate. Not whether or not I can participate. It's whether or not I want to. I can if I want to.
I'm going to do a quick pause for an interpreter switch. All set? It's so interesting listening to your story, because, both the ways in which you found sports and the Paralympics, and also your advocacy, which is now a huge part of your life today, seem to have really kind of organically emerged from just immersing yourself in the life around you and kind of discovering these things. On that note, something that is what has been a notable topic around this year's games, and very much relates to the deafblind community, which is a large part of the platform that we have here, is the story around the swimmer who's deafblind, Becca Myers. Can you set up, what the conversation is around that?
Well, I don't know Becca, and it's only things that I've read and my own experience of competing and seeing other athletes that need support or help, myself included, and having to rely on coaches or teammates to do that, when it would have been so much better to have someone who was trained. So the story, as I understand it, is that she wanted to be able to travel with her personal care attendant. People say PCA when they talk about it, and her mom was working as that person and does that in her daily living life as she goes 24/7 through the world. So she was told that she could not have that person with her when she went to Tokyo, and that she would have to rely on the staff that they have at the games to be able to fulfill those types of duties. And the staff is not necessarily trained to support her, especially with her deafness, because deafness is not part of the disability classification for the Paralympic Games. So there may be people that compete that are hard of hearing or deaf, but they aren't necessarily involved in Paralympic Games. They're more involved in DeafBlind's. And so having that knowledge of really being able to deal with someone who has a couple of different disabilities is a lot, I think. And then being a coach who's involved with setting up, making sure all of their athletes are getting to where they need to be, and their lanes are, and they're going to the meetings, and they're, I mean, running around in circles like 800 miles an hour when you're at the at the games. Because honestly, I never saw a coach really until there was a meeting with us, or we were on the track and they were somewhere else. So when I was at the Paralympics, I didn't see coaches that much. They just told us, here's your numbers, here's your lanes, get out there, go kick some. And so for her not to have that kind of support that she needs, and she told a story about traveling internationally at an event, I might have been Rio, where she didn't have a PCA, and she had a really hard time and was quite frightened while she was there because she felt unsafe. And so it's time, my personal opinion, it's time for the Olympic and Paralympic Committee in the United States, as well as the International Paralympic Committee, to begin to put in place that opportunity for people to bring people with them that know how to deal with what their needs are and keep it safe. Because relying on a coach to do those kind of things doesn't get it done. I mean, when I was competing, we have athletes, and I mentioned this earlier about classification. So classification has to do with different types of physical disabilities. And so in the area of mobility disability, there are people who are paraplegic, which means 2 limbs and usually lower limbs, and I'm a paraplegic. And then there are people that are quadriplegic, which means 4 limbs involved. And then there are people that are hemiplegic that have one side, that has paralysis type involvement, I think is the best way to say it. And so someone who is quadriplegic usually has more involvement in all 4 areas of their limbs, and they need more help moving their equipment around, getting things where they need them, and also oftentimes getting dressed, or getting into doing their daily needs, or getting to the cafeteria to eat. So getting their food, oftentimes cafeterias are kind of a smorgasbord of things, or you have to go with your plate and from station to station, and carrying something like that and having some kind of hand involvement can be quite challenging. For some people it's not, but I helped a lot of my athlete friends that were on the team that had disabilities, that had arm and hand involvement, to get things done, help them with their gloves when we were in competition, lots of different things, where someone who was dedicated to doing that, the responsibility, even though it wasn't my responsibility, but the responsibility wouldn't fall on teammates or coaches that are there to do other things, So it's time, from my perspective again, for them to reevaluate where they're at, because it's very ableistic what they're doing. They're really pushing the entire definition of ableism. The one, I love the definition from T.L. Lewis around ableism, and I'm just going to make a little synopsis on it, is that it puts value on certain bodies as more valuable than other bodies. And so the more non-disabled you are, the more value you're considered to have. And we're seeing that over and over. And you don't have to have a disability to experience ableism. I want to be clear about that. And looking up T.L. Lewis's definition of ableism is a really good idea, because ableism and racism, and I heard Rebecca Coakley, one of our leaders in the disability movement, say ableism and racism are the roots of the same tree of oppression. Mm-hmm. And those are linked. And if we want to dismantle racism, of which we must and have to, we have to also understand and dismantle ableism, because they go together. And that, what happened to Becca, from my perspective, is ableism to the max. And she has an opportunity to really fight this and make a statement. I think the Convention on Rights for Persons with Disabilities could have supported some of some of the things that she could have brought up legally. I think it could have supported it pretty well.
That's a really elegant definition of ableism that I'll certainly take with me beyond this conversation. And back to the Becca Myers situation, again, as someone who's acquired all my information from reading about it as well, including reading what she wrote about it, I think what's so interesting about it, and I think what has led to the controversy, if you will, is I think back to the ADA and like reasonable accommodation, and to say that like it's, that doesn't fall into that category or necessary in this case. If not at the Paralympics, then where? It feels like really a large part of the ethos of those games is to make it a games where, the very people that it's intended to feature have the ability to participate in it in the ways that they need to be able to compete at the levels they need to give themselves the best chance to compete at a high level. And I think that's, what definitely struck me the most from that is like, if a beyond reasonable, in this case necessary accommodation, like a personal care assistant for a swimmer who's deaf-blind in a foreign country who has not yet been acquainted with the surroundings of anywhere she's going to be, if that doesn't fall into the category of something that's necessary, what would really, I guess, is kind of what really stood out to me when I first read the account of what had happened there. And she unfortunately ended up having to withdraw, or she made the decision to withdraw from the games because it didn't seem like she was going to be able to get what she needed in this case, which is really unfortunate, because obviously if you're a Paralympic athlete, this is the show. So it's certainly unfortunate what happened there, but like you said, hopefully a case like this can shine light on this subject in a way, and have there be more of an understanding moving forward of how what necessary accommodations are in this case.
Right. And that's it's a great point to really point out about a reasonable accommodation. One is, most countries don't have any kind of rights for disabled people, and so reasonable accommodation, they're like, what's that? And so the USOPC, the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee, they said that it was the Tokyo Committee saying that they couldn't have more people because of COVID, and the Tokyo Committee said, no, that's not true. So in the United States, we understand reasonable accommodation, but one of the problems that we have with the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee is that oftentimes Paralympians are treated like Olympians in areas where they shouldn't be treated the same because the needs are different. Yes, of course, they should get the same accolades. They should get the same support financially. They should get the same award type things. They should get the same opportunities. But when it comes to the Paralympics, there is a real difference because we're dealing with disability. And one of the things we're seeing, and this is me and my opinions, one of the things we're seeing in Paralympic sport is that we're trying really hard to be like Olympians. And I'll explain that because I was covering the 2012 games, which were a paradigm shift pivotal games for the Paralympic movement in London. And I was watching opening ceremonies, and it was the least amount of people that I'd ever seen coming into opening ceremonies using wheelchairs. In the past, there was lots and lots of wheelchairs. And this was the least amount of wheelchairs I had ever seen in opening ceremonies, which meant that they were beginning to eliminate sports that involved people with mobility disabilities and going more towards more standing sports. And I thought that was a really interesting piece because I started to look at then what sports had been eliminated, and they were sports that had to do with people that had the higher, most involved disabilities. And so I think there's a level of ableism that's happening in the Paralympic movement to be like the Olympics so that we get, what's the way I should say this? The way we get attention for the Paralympic Games is be like the Olympics. And that's not the way we should get attention for the Paralympic Games, because the Paralympic Games are sport like the Olympics, but they're different and they add a different piece to it, and the two can complement each other. They don't have to be the same. And we have a real opportunity to create a more social awareness around what needs to happen in the world to create equity and opportunity and inclusion and diversity and access, if we really look at and celebrate what the difference is and not try to be, let's say the word is homogeneous. Is that the word that I'm thinking of, Doug?
Yeah, that works.
Yeah.
You know what? I find this interesting talking about ableism in the Paralympics as well. That it's, I mean, maybe someone who's not that familiar with the games might think, oh, that's a place where that definitely isn't going to exist because of the whole point of what it is. But as you pointed out, that is the case. Do you see a world in which there can be the removal or eradication or transformation of ableism in any arena where there's like competitive sporting events involved? Or I mean, is that so deeply embedded in like our concept of competitive sports that it's hard to completely rid it of ableism?
You make such a great point there, showing that at the heart of sport, it really is quite ableistic. It really is. It's about, overcoming things, and I truly do think that, because I'm an eternal optimist, I truly do believe that we can dismantle ableism as we move outside our sport. So we can do our sport and act it out all we want there. But once we leave the sport, we have to dismantle it outside the sport because it doesn't serve the sport anymore. What we want is real inclusion. We want as many people as possible to participate in whatever activities they can that have the moniker of sport, because it is powerful in so many ways. It gives us so much. Whether you're a spectator or a participant, we get so much from the humanity of sport. One of the leaders in our disability movement, Keith Jones, who also is one of the founders of Crip Hop Nation, and they actually just won an Emmy for the title song of Rising Phoenix, which is on Netflix, and it's about the Paralympic Games. And I have to say, Crip Hop Nation, you got to check them out. They're pretty awesome. Keith Jones says sport really shows us our humanity in so many ways and connects us to each other as humans in so many ways. And that's why it's so powerful. And that's why we want to do it right. We want to be able to create that opportunity for everyone to participate in whatever way they want to.
Just to think, as someone who's a huge sports enthusiast, many different kind of sports, yes, it's, I love seeing people compete at a high level and the competitive aspect of sport. But I think the thing that really compels me the most is really just the act of someone pushing themselves to their own limits and also just partaking in this community aspect of something, doing that alongside other people. And I think whatever that is, whether it be in sport, whether it be in, some creative art or whatever other pursuits we have, I think we end up learning just a lot more about ourselves. And in turn, I think it connects us more to other people. Anytime that we have these kind of deeper insights into ourselves, there's this kind of I think deeper well of and capacity for empathy with others. And that's what I think I love most about sport, and I think what can really kind of get me engaged in a whole number of sports. So I can definitely relate to a lot of some of the aspects that you're talking about what is really happening there on that stage and what's really important about it.
I really appreciate that you brought forward empathy, because it is a big part of the human experience of figuring out what it's like to be that other person, right? And I think the other piece of that, the other bookend, maybe so to speak, is compassion. I think that we need to develop compassion for each other in a really big way. I think learning about, what my life is like and what it's like to have a disability, all of that is okay. I don't want to put you in a wheelchair because you're going to go, oh, this is really hard. It sucks. I don't want you to see how bad and hard it is for you for the first time, because I'm a professional now and it's not hard. But I want you to have compassion for what's still missing and why we need to have these kind of conversations to learn about and educate, and then, get excited by, right? Watching the Paralympic Games, we're going to get really excited about a lot of different people and the sports. For one, I really hope they show bocce, because it's one of the few sports left that athletes with more involved disabilities are the competitors. And it will blow your mind at how strategic it is and the devices that they're using. And I personally think, I hope they do it. I don't know if they will, but I think they should use an overhead camera to be able to show the game from above. Because I think the side, you just don't get the real picture of what the intensity is going on there. Because lots of times when someone who's non-disabled sees someone who is using a power chair, they're using a device to speak with, and they have someone that's helping them with things, they have a lot of kind of pity and sympathy and things like that. And they shouldn't have that, because they should have more compassion of, we need to make this world work for everybody. And so when you see a person who you might pity doing that sport, it changes everything. And I'm excited by the Paralympics getting a wider audience, more broad audience to be able to watch it. I just hope that people don't get caught up in the one of the terms we use is inspiration porn, is the whole idea of, oh wow, I'm glad that's not me, or only only disability is a bad attitude. No, that's not what we want you to think when you watch this. Is that, oh, for the grace of God, go I. It's just no, don't do that. This is a life experience, and we want to create opportunities for everyone to be able to choose what experience they want to have and then pursue it at the highest.
You've gotten into this a little bit, but with the remaining couple minutes we have here, can you talk a little bit more about the work that you do today?
Oh, sure. Oh my gosh. So I really have been kind of a jack of all trades. I've just kind of moved around a bunch. I got involved with the Christopher and Dana Reeves Foundation through my dear friend Sam Maddox, who was the information, he was the knowledge manager for the Christopher Reeve Foundation, and he started the blog squad, of which still continues to this day. I was a part of the squad for about 8 years, and he really showed me that there's different ways to get your voice out there. So one of the things that I started to do was write, and as I started writing, I started developing a program that taught about what the disability experience is and all the different types of disabilities, the language, the laws, the sports, all the pieces of it, so that I could create more allies in the non-disabled world to create more opportunity for people with disabilities by understanding and breaking down some of their fears. Because as we all know, we have lots of bias, all of us, and we need to figure out what that bias is and then dismantle it. And by understanding and getting knowledge, we can dismantle things. So I created some programs for adults and for kids that did that. And that then morphed into working with other groups like Open Doors organization in the travel and tourism industry, teaching around disability. And that then took me to working with the group that was bidding to bring the Olympic and Paralympic Games to Los Angeles. And I was the disability and Paralympic engagement coordinator for that group when we were bidding for the games. And honestly, it was such a great experience because I really got to understand more about how the games, Olympic and Paralympic games, work, but also what needs to happen next. And so LA won the games, and I'm here in Los Angeles now working with a couple of different things. One is trying to create some new community. And so there's a few of us that are together building something secret right now, but it'll come forward. But also dipping into the entertainment industry a little bit more with Lights Camera Access, which is a really great group that mentors people with disabilities that want to work in front of and behind the camera. And we've been working on these different productions. Last year we started ADA 30 production, and you can find it on YouTube. It's ADA 30 Lead On. And then we did Ending, which is the National Disability Employment Awareness Month. So we have a whole piece on that. And then Black Future Month. And now we're working on ADA 31, which is going to come out in a couple of weeks. And I'm learning how you produce these kind of things. So I've had the opportunity to work with our lead writer, Mark, and be able to write some scripts and then also work in production and look at what the editor's doing. I haven't tried that yet, but I've done a little bit of editing on my own with little baby videos that I've made to try to teach about things. But yeah, my whole I think sole purpose is really about elevating voices of other people. It's about educating and creating spaces where community can come together and then come up with the next greatest thing that's gonna really elevate our humanity to that space where we're living in love.
That's a great description right there. I can get behind that. Well, we're basically at time now, but I do have one last really hard-hitting question for you, which is, where do you keep all of your medals?
Oh, well, I keep them close at hand so that I can take them out and take them places so people can put them on. And feel the magic of a medal, because that's I think one of their purposes is so that other people feel the magic and get excited about doing whatever it is that they want to do to in their lives to feel that sense of fulfillment of their humanity. And so they are, well, I have this thing that's like a couple drawers, and it's got all kinds of my paraphernalia from Paralympic stuff. And so they're in their boxes. And to be perfectly honest, I don't have all of them anymore because I have given some of them away to people that um, you know were important to me. And I thought, hey, they liked them, and I thought, well, you can have it.
Well, I love that, and thank you so much for joining us today. It was I was really looking forward to this. It was so nice to connect with you back when at that screening, and I'm glad it's led to this conversation and hopefully a lot more. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's been great. Thanks for having me. You can tell I love to talk about stuff. So
Well, and thank you to everyone who tuned in as well. If you look in the description of wherever you're finding this, we'll make sure to include where you can watch the Paralympic Games this year. And yeah, well, stay tuned. We'll be doing more of these coming up. And thanks again.